Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 91. And this episode, we wanted to talk about cooking in video games. The mechanics, the history, the strange, wonderful things that could be made, even though you can't actually get your hands on any of the stuff. And we have a guest this episode. We brought Rebekah Valentine of GameIndustry.biz and an upcoming cooking podcast as well. Reb, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is so perfect. This is what I do. This is what I love.
Excellent.
This is very exciting for the
On
listener.
accident.
For the listener who can't see, Reb is huddling around a cup of tea and is the embodiment of coziness on the internet. Your upcoming podcast, Cozywood Kitchenette, is a thing that you're launching as of when we're recording soon. Hopefully we'll be live by the time this comes out 2 months from now.
Fingers crossed.
But talking about the new podcast before we dive into talking about cooking, what inspired doing a video game related cooking podcast?
Oh, well, this has all happened entirely by accident.
That's sorry, the best kind.
I'm going to tell you my life story now. So I did not grow up cooking. I did not know how to cook. I went to college, barely. I knew how to make I could put noodles in a pot. That's about as good as I can do. And I generally didn't. I just ate at the cafeteria. It didn't matter. And then one day I walked in on my roommate making She was making noodles, which was something I knew how to do. But then she was also making homemade pasta sauce in our dorm room kitchen. We were in the fancy senior dorms. And I just looked at that and I don't know what it was, because obviously we had a stove and an oven this whole time. I had been in that dorm for months. And I just looked at her and I'm like, wait, we can just do that? We can just make what? And it just blew my mind. And so I started trying to learn how to make simple things. And I wasn't great at it. And then, fast forward a couple years, I was given the World of Warcraft cookbook for Christmas.
Amazing.
And I was given it on Christmas Eve, and it has this picture of this beautiful, juicy roasted turkey on the front. And the next day I had been planning on making Christmas dinner for my parents. And I had done all the prep, right? I'd had the turkey in the fridge thawing correctly. I had, onions and salt and pepper and the things that you would need, but I didn't actually have a recipe in mind. And so I was panicking that morning. I was like, why didn't I plan for this better? And I looked at the front of that cookbook and I was like, wait, there's a turkey recipe in here. And I opened it up and it was easy and I had all the ingredients and I followed it and I did it and it was good. And over the next few months, I started making more and more recipes. And I thought I could just make all of these if I wanted to. And so in the ensuing couple years, I have made every one of the 100 recipes in the World of Warcraft cookbook. I have made every one of the, I think, 70 some in the Elder Scrolls cookbook, official cookbooks. I just a couple months ago finished doing all of the 60 some recipes in the Mother's cookbook, which is Earthbound based. And I am coming up on I'm kind of waiting to launch the podcast first, but I'm coming up on starting working through every recipe in the Legends cookbook, which is Legend of Zelda inspired. And I'm not great. I'm not an amazing cook. I'm very mediocre. About half the stuff I make turns out really good because I follow the recipe. And about half of it turns out kind of because I'm very impatient. But I like cooking and I like food. And I love doing all these video game cookbooks has made me think more and more about the intersection of food and culture in games and kind of what food in video games means and, how we perceive it and how we think about it as, beyond just an item that heals you, right? And so Cozywood Kitchenette kind of started from a combination of me having all these thoughts in my brain and then also feeling comfortable enough in just the games industry and the games world in general that I wanted to start a project that was all my own and not tethered to, my job at games industry or something else. I wanted something that was just mine. So it's going to be a podcast where every episode we do a recipe. It might be one out of one of the cookbooks. It might be just a random, we're going to learn how to make bread today. That's it. Very, very, very simple stuff. It's going to be I'm going to walk you through the recipe, very Bob Rossian style. So it's nice. Just audio, no video, but you're going to hear me, walking you through the steps, the ingredients, one thing at a time, taking our time. So you can just turn it on and, hopefully make the recipe alongside me without having to constantly stop and pause. But in the spaces where we're waiting for something to bake or waiting for something to heat up or we're stirring something, every episode is going to be a conversation with someone from the video game community or the food community about how that food intersects with a certain video game. So we're recording this early enough that I can't really get into specifics on guests yet, but what, like, a possible example would be, we might talk to a developer of an indie game that has like a really interesting food in it, and we'll make that food, and then we'll talk to them about why that food is in the game, what it tells us about the world and the culture of that game. We might also talk to people who are really good at making certain foods, but, you know, aren't necessarily as connected to the games, about, you know, what that food says about the culture of that world and how it was like inspired and things like that. So that's the idea behind Cozywood Kitchenette. Sorry, that was a very long story for one question.
No, it's okay.
No.
It's great. I love it. You've become kind of the unofficial food expert on my Twitter feed, at least. And so this just seemed like a perfect marriage of stuff. And like Geoff and I talk a lot on the show about a variety of different topics. And this one, cooking and games, runs further back than I realized, and also is more ubiquitous in gaming than I realized also when looking at it. And what's funny is your side quest episode, which has aired by now, was also about food and gaming, because Bots and Kaitos, I will not say the entire title. I refuse, because it'll take me
Even though
years.
I did like 50 times.
It was the best.
And thank you for doing so.
But that also revolves around food, and I'd never played the game. And like once you had chosen it, and then I listened to the episode to edit, I was like, oh, well, this makes sense. This is a perfect RPG plus food equals Rebekah Valentine in my book.
It's funny that you point that out, because I hadn't even considered Bat and Kaitos for my list of things to cook stuff from. So now after we record this, I'm going to have to sit down and be like, okay, what am I making from Bat and Kaitos, and who am I inviting on to talk about that?
Amazing.
If I will volunteer now, if you ever are at a lack of a guest to have, I firmly volunteer, because I'm very excited to be talking about this topic, because I have a deep video game and food history. Yes, let me sum up. I grew up around cooking. My father is a professional chef. He actually just recently launched his own podcast interviewing other celebrity chefs. So I grew up around the idea. He didn't teach me how to cook when I was a kid. He taught me like some basic stuff, some knife skills, things like that. And I found it also in college. But it was around that idea that food and meals are important and things to be shared, and always ask about where everything comes from and why we do it that way. And, you know, follow the recipe, sure, but also why do all of these things work? If something goes wrong, how do we fix it? All of the fun little improvisational instincts that come through on that. And it all came back around later for me as well, in that terms of, I have trouble with a lot of nerdy cookbooks, because, you know, I'm a nerd. I have trouble digesting certain foods and things. So sometimes it's like, oh, what lovely baking. I am so lactose intolerant, it hurts. Like, it hurts me.
Oh,
it hurts
I'm so
everyone.
sorry.
I am too, because those things look amazing. And especially like video game based baking. Like, I've seen like Kirby cakes and all kinds of wonderful stuff, and those always look the best in video games. Even before graphics like got really good, baked goods in bread in video games looks so good. I mean, so I'm very excited to be talking about this with you. And I very much volunteer in terms of, if you don't have a direct line, I will talk about food and games forever.
I have a conversation to have with you after we're done recording.
Please do.
Excellent. I'm useless in a kitchen, but I will talk about video games and cooking. Like, for example, so one of the more recent games actually that stood out as far as cooking in video games is Breath of the Wild, right? Like, anyone who's played Breath of the Wild has talked at length about the cooking in that game. Even Brian David Gilbert did an episode of Unraveled where he cooked everything in that game poorly with basic ingredients, and some of it worked and most of it didn't. But what I love about that game is that it makes cooking fun just in the joy and the sound cues and the game mechanics. Like, sure, the food, some of it looks good based on the graphics, but a lot of it is like, Link is so excited to be cooking every time that I'm excited. Even when you make terrible stuff with like the monster parts in food, sometimes if you mix that, and like, he'll still eat it if you make him and then like gag afterwards, which I feel bad about. But sometimes you need even one heart. Like, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, but that's not the only way that like Link goes through something you tell him to do and instantly regrets it. We've all kicked the chest without boots on.
That's true. Yeah. But it's one of those things where like it made like, and I've cooked in other games, and it's funny, Reb, that you mention the World of Warcraft cookbook, because I think that's one of the earliest games in modern gen that I remember like cooking as a skill, and that you had to level up and that it helped you. And it's interesting to me how different games tie cooking into the mechanics, whether it's just health or it's power ups or it's, buffs or whatever.
Yeah, I think the Breath of the Wild example is really interesting, and I think a favorite and one that drew a lot of attention to food in games, right? Because like I said, there's well, it's not an official cookbook, it's an inspired cookbook, but a lot of the stuff in Legends cookbook is Breath of the Wild inspired, and I think that one is so appealing because food in games can sometimes feel like it manifests in a bunch of different ways, right? So like if you're looking at something like Earthbound, everything, it's there's like a hot dog or a burger you can buy, or it's something like really, really bizarre and kind of out there. But in Breath of the Wild, you're picking a mushroom and you're putting it in a pan with some salt and you get a salt grilled mushroom. And that's like, those are two things and it's only two things and it's very simple, but it's good. Like I remember when Breath of the Wild came out, I was trying my hand at some of that stuff and I went out on the grill and I just made salt grilled mushrooms. And it was easy. There wasn't anything to it. And I love that feeling, that kind of like rustic, very wild feeling of just stuff you find, throw it in and it works. And you're right. Like Link is just so excited about it and it feels so good. And World of Warcraft, I think, touches on those roots too, especially early on in the game when you're just learning like the first recipes, because you're just cooking a fish or you're just baking a bread. And it's all stuff that like is very simple and tangible and stuff that you can easily understand or replicate. And then it gets ridiculous further on because you're making like fell eggs and ham or whatever.
Nothing, and it's the only thing in World of Warcraft that's ridiculous. Like nothing ever goes over the top there. Nothing's ostentatious. Like I don't know what they were thinking with the cooking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And also like cooking in games has had a variety of interesting growth in the recent years. I mean, it's been around. There have been cooking games since probably even the Nintendo era, but it's one of those things where visually being blown away by cooking, the biggest one that I ever saw was the newest Final Fantasy. I think it's still considered the newest. I guess Remake is the newest, but Final Fantasy 15. Like cooking is such an integral part of that because I can't remember the character who cooks for you. Ignis. But like those recipes, they look good. Like they are photorealistic food. And I'd never been made hungry by a video game in recent years. I mean, I think everybody playing the Ninja Turtles games, every time you eat a pizza, you're like, I want pizza. Especially me growing up in New York. It's like that kind of was always transitive. But there's something about Final Fantasy 15 and how photorealistic the food looks that made it even more different for me because it felt more real, even if they were just buffs and power-ups and were returning health, because the photorealism translated something that you couldn't with the visualization of food before that.
Yeah, they also have that, and I have not played Final Fantasy 15, but they also have that cup noodle tie-in, right?
Yes.
Which is a piece of like very funny advertising, right? And like there's a whole other conversation to be had about, the encroachment of real world brands into video games. But in the food sense, cup noodle is, I know cup noodle. I can go to the store and buy a cup noodle. I know exactly what that tastes like precisely. Yeah. And so seeing that in the game, even though that's like a very simple thing, but them talking about the things that they have a conversation where they talk about the things that you like add on to the cup noodle and whatever. And I can like, that all paints such a vivid, specific picture in my mind. It's really funny, but it's just like really perfect. And you're right. It kind of makes your mouth water a little bit. You're like, I want a cup noodle. Okay.
Yeah. I only ever eat cup noodle when I was camping or like band camp or things like that. But yeah, still like it connects you to a time, a place, a feeling, everything. And it's really cool with the FF15 example because some of it is you're not the one making the meal. You're providing some of the ingredients and pieces, and it's Ignis over here with this new recipe and making all of that. And it taps into an interesting sort of, because with a lot of cooking mechanics in games nowadays, it feels like get the ingredients, go to spot, activate, make. You're not doing the nitty gritty here. You're not stirring, you're not chopping, you're not anything like that. But with the payoff of how photorealistic or how beautiful it is with Ignis, and you are finding and giving, that is something that's very strongly in RPGs, whether it's bringing mushrooms and honey to taste tea in Paper Mario, whether it is bringing whatever thing to the chef in Odin's Sphere or any of those. It's like, here's a thing, here's the beautiful thing back. But it's still, even though you're not doing the physical labor of it, it still connects you to the meal. It's still like whether World of Warcraft or any other online RPG. My drug of choice was EverQuest, and the complexity of recipes that went on with that was crazy. You get that same connection of like cup noodle, super convenient. Pour the hot water in there, boom. But like some of the more involved things, if you order them at a restaurant or if you order them somewhere, you get the thing, you eat it, it's delicious, off you go. But whether you're cooking it, whether you're providing the ingredients or whatever it is, it invests you in that food. It invests you in that meal. And it's not maybe as immediately like heart-pounding as a boss fight, but you are invested in the success of that meal and the payoff of what it is.
Kind of related to that and related to what you were saying about the communal aspects of food earlier. I keep going back to World of Warcraft, but that's one that, I have a lot of specificity tied to. I raid in World of Warcraft regularly. And one thing that they do in that game, and other games may do it as well, is they have feasts now as a mechanic. And so if you're the chef for your raid team or whatever, you might, spend time making a bunch of individual dishes. And if you yourself eat one of those individual dishes, you get a stat boost, right? And so that's important. But you can take all those individual dishes, and once you get a certain amount of, five of these, whatever, you can combine them into a feast. And then you use that feast right before the raid, and it puts out a big old table with all these steaming meats and vegetables and things, and everybody can come and click on it, and everybody gets whatever buff it is they need for that raid that's best for their class or their role. And so it turns into this thing where you have just this gathering of characters around this steaming table very briefly before they go kick a monster's butt, and it feels really good and like communal. And even though it's only like a couple seconds and everybody just kind of regards as okay, it's another thing to click on, there's still kind of this momentary feeling of, oh, we're having a feast and then we're gonna go fight. That's
super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I used to play WoW. I don't play it as much anymore. I come and go with it. I have an open relationship with World of Warcraft. We'll put it that way. I remember early levels as a warrior palling around with a mage, and the mage would always make me bread, so that because bread is a food item and it will regen your health between battles, and just the bread changes as you go up in levels. They get better breads and different breads that regen more health. And it always just made me want to bake or want to eat bread just because. And I can hear the bread creation sound effect in my head. I remember what that sounds like. And you're right, it is very communal in the way WoW does it. And a lot of other MMOs have done similar things where creating a thing, not just for you, but creating it for your group so you can adventure together or you can do something. And I like the community of cooking. I'm a person who can cook by necessity and will cook by necessity, but I don't necessarily find it fun. I find it mostly nerve-wracking because I'm an anxious human. I'm sure a shock to everybody listening. And so I spend more time worrying about screwing it up than actually enjoying the process. But that said, I love watching other people cook. I love learning about cooking, and I love engaging in it from a distance. And I think one of the things that made me engage with cooking as a process besides doing it was games that focus on just cooking, like your Cooking Mama, which is the more recent franchise that has had some hiccups in recent years, we'll say. But I remember playing on the Wii a ton, that and Trauma Center, but we're not getting into medical stuff in video games.
That's a different cutting.
It is a different cutting. But they're both mechanically kind of similar, and it's essentially mini games, right? You're doing mini games that represent a task, and for Cooking Mama, it's representing cooking. And I always just found it really interesting, especially with Cooking Mama, because she's so cheery. She is very much just there to encourage you. Even when you screw up, she doesn't scold you. She's just that was bad, or it was still very kind of
bad.
A very
the
cheery
kitchen is
voice.
On fire. The earth is salted. That was bad.
Yeah, essentially. But I think games like that, I feel like I can't think of others besides Cooking Mama that focus on the game mechanic of cooking as the game. I'm sure there are others, though.
There's ones that I was thinking of beforehand. Because I think there's more than we realized, because a lot of them didn't come out of Japan, or they didn't come to America. Before we recorded, I was like, I need to remember the name of this one game that I played the demo for so much. It was on a PlayStation Underground. It was a PS1 title that was, you were running a small restaurant, like a short order cook. So I'm going to butcher the name here. Ore no Rayuri. it was a game where you use the analog sticks to, like, okay, you need to slice the vegetables. You'd use the left analog stick to move the vegetable along and the right stick to, like, go up and down to chop. You needed
I love it.
You needed to move the pan around, so you'd use that, but you can't have anything spill, but nothing should sit there too long. And you need to, like, keep switching between the tasks because people are ordering stuff and you can't spend all day just chopping a veggie or just stirring the pot or whatever other things there were. I think it might have been you're just running a ramen shop. And so it's
I love this.
Yeah, like I played that demo so much and it was still all in Japanese. So it really was just being thrown into the kitchen with no instruction. It was kind of nice. And you like had to be careful about moving your fingers or giving yourself enough time there. Like you could absolutely cut your fingertips off. It was ridiculous. It was just that right. It was like, it wasn't gory because it's all very like, think of the sorts of like kiddie manga anime stuff that doesn't really come to America that often, like the very cutesy sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Put that into PS1 polygons, cooking mini games. That's the game, as far as I know. So there's probably a bunch of other ones that I'm not aware of, but you're right. The collection of mini games doesn't happen a lot.
Overcooked, I think, is the only other one that really springs to mind, and that has, like, you know, certain degrees of specificity to it. And I like that one because it is communal in a very different way.
Yes. Too many cooks.
But yeah. But the one thing that I like about that one, you know, in addition to the fact that Overcooked is just fun as hell, is that there's only a small selection of recipes, right? I mean, there's like pizza, burgers, sushi. Like, I mean, there's several things, but there's only this set amount. But you'll find yourself making burgers repeatedly until you know how to make a burger. Like, you know exactly what all the ingredients are, what order you need to do them in, and you start getting kind of these processes for, okay, we need to always have people chopping and cooking meat. We need to always have people, you know, doing this to the vegetables. Like, you get better at it. Like, it lets you specifically improve, and then it throws other things in the mix. One of my two dreams for like food and video game intersections is a reality TV show version of Overcooked, where like you have a bunch of celebrity chefs in a kitchen trying to do things, and then you have people in rat costumes running around stealing ingredients from them or something, or like the stage just keeps shifting around while they're trying to get to the stove. I think that would be amazing.
I mean, we've already got Cutthroat Kitchen. Like this, like we're so close.
This is just the next level, yeah.
Yeah.
Overcooked is one of those games where also it's satisfying to do the actions, right? Like even when you're stressed out and you're freaking out, like, yeah, the chopping is super tactile. And like Geoff and I have talked about this a lot in other episodes. Like sometimes the tactile nature of the mechanics of a game is enough for you to love it. Like I've been a longtime lover of the Devil May Cry series, and not so much because it's brilliant writing or it's, you know, phenomenal gameplay. It's that the one-to-one of hitting something with another thing is so satisfying tactily, even if that thing is a giant motorcycle mace weapon. Yes, I'm not making that up. That's in the 5th game. That kind of feedback is really satisfying. And like, I think in Breath of the Wild, in the same way that the audio cues are really satisfying, Overcooked has that tactile nature of the chopping. Like when you were mimicking it, Reb, I felt it. Like it just takes me right back to the game. And also it's comedy, and I like comedy in everything. And the fact that it's such a ridiculous story with the Onion King, and it's like the food apocalypse.
A giant meatball.
Yeah, it's really just goofy in the best way. And I think, again, there are different ways to do community around cooking in real life, and there is in games too. And Overcooked is a competitive cooperative because you're supposed to be working together, but also there's this need to be like the best and to like organize, and someone always steps up. You always know who the wannabe chef in your friend group is, because they'll step up and go, all right, I'm the sous chef. You need to do this. You do that. We're going to meet here and we're going to do all this stuff, and then we're going to get it done. Like someone always steps up to like lead the rest.
I mean, that's how it works in a restaurant. You have the executive chef, you have the sous chef, you have them running the line, you've got your sauciers, you've got, like, depending on all that, like it's a fun division of, there's like anybody who does a lot of cooking or has gotten good at cooking or is like the cook of their friend group, you get that like, oh man, it's so good, you know, you should open a restaurant kind of thing. It's a very different skill set, mindset, everything, to be a really, like, to cook at home, to cook and to take on all of it, even if you cook with a partner, your family, a group of friends, versus being in a restaurant kitchen. Holy shit.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the kind of stress that provides. And like one of the things that I like about modern incorporations of cooking is that when it gives you something back, whether it's a beautiful picture, the chimes, as we've mentioned multiple times from Breath of the Wild, or even in Overcooked, the star rating and the success after accomplishing something. There are tons of games, though, that don't really give you a lot. Like I would say that World of Warcraft gives you a lot as far as the stats side, but the victory of cooking, the act of cooking is kind of clicking a button. It's kind of unrewarding. And then something that really stands out to me as a game that doesn't hold up as well as it did when I first played it, and the cooking is another part of it, is Skyrim. I feel like I loved Skyrim when I played it. I thought it was revolutionary when it came to gaming, but I feel like now when I go back to it, doing the tasks, making the things just feels so unsatisfying because there's no real fanfare to it. It just kind of is. And I feel like that's the downside when doing cooking in some games, is it can feel task-oriented and very boring. And I think that's when it's at its worst.
Yeah, that was a really fascinating thing about doing the Elder Scrolls cookbook, is because when you really think about it, that game does not have many finished foods.
No.
When you think about it. And so the recipes in that cookbook, and Chelsea Monroe Castle is like one of my cooking idols, basically. She did World of Warcraft cookbook and Elder Scrolls and a whole bunch of others. But what she did was she took all of the ingredients that you find in Skyrim. So there's lots of cheese, of course. There's lots of honey, because they've got like the breweries and stuff for the mead. There's lots of leeks and apples and things. And she made a whole bunch of recipes that are kind of like Nordic inspired based off of those ingredients. And so whereas World of Warcraft cookbook was like a wider range of things from like all different cultures and cuisines, because you travel to like different places throughout that. The Elder Scrolls cookbook was very Skyrim focused. I mean, there were some other things from other games too, but it was very Skyrim focused, and it was very much about having a set of I don't know, like 50 or so, or probably not even that many, but a set of like maybe 15 or so key ingredients that are used in like almost everything, and then shuffling those in with some other stuff and, seeing what kinds of things you can make. And that was really, really fun. What you said to some games that aren't as satisfying with cooking, one that's driving me just nuts right now is I've been playing through the Yakuza games, and I played through Yakuza 0 and I played through Yakuza Kiwami, and wandering around Kamurocho, there's so many really good sounding places to eat, right? Like they have sushi, they have ramen, takoyaki, beef bowls, all these like just really amazing sounding things. And you go there and you can read like these just really like beautiful descriptions of, the kind of food. And then you pick one to eat, and then all you see is Kiryu's back as he bends over a bowl of something. You can't see it. And I'm just, show me the food, Yakuza. Show it to me. I want to see it.
Show me the goods. Give them to me.
That's a series that does a lot of things right, but I would agree. Like, I was thinking of that too. Like in Yakuza 0, which is something that Reb and I have both played fairly recently, much to the screaming of Cam Koenig and a few others on the internet. It does so many of the mini games right that it's disappointing when the cooking stuff isn't. And like one of the coolest mom and pop restaurants that you go into in all of Yakuza 0, you don't even cook in. They're a supply shop and a back dealing shop for like supplies and weapons and artifacts and other things. And like, you can't even eat there. I think I
literally walked in there one time because like I was passing it and I was like, well, I don't really want to engage with this like item shop thing right now, but I need to eat food before I go fight this guy. So I'm just go in there and grab a meal really quick. And I talked to the guy behind the counter and he's like, do you want to fight me? And I'm like, no, I want you to feed me. What's your problem?
Yeah. It's a series that does a lot of stuff well. And because I love a lot of the cuisine from Japan, of course, or the butchered American version of it, since it's hard to get authentic stuff here sometimes, I was disappointed by that, because I love almost everything else about that game. It has its issues like all games of a time as we grow, but it that was really a bummer to me, because again, I like that kind of cuisine. And I think that it can really turn a game off to me if there's no effort put into the kinds of things you're using for power-ups, especially when it's food related. Like, I think to a lot of it's common in RPGs more than anything else to eat food for health, like the transitive property. But even in beat 'em ups, like I think about how the roast turkeys look in the 8-bit generation, like in, Streets of Rage or Castlevania or any of that stuff. Like, most of the time it looks good enough, even in sprite form, that you're like, I'm hungry now.
Yeah, and it makes it distinct, which is what they really had to do.
Yeah, because you had to know what it was. Like, I can picture the turkey leg from Castlevania or the roast turkey from Streets of Rage. What I love, like, I've been playing the newest Streets of Rage, the one that just came out, and they kept a lot of that. Even though the artwork is kind of cel-shaded, it is still inspired by sprite work. And so a lot of the apples that you would find on the ground and the turkey, the full roast turkeys, which first of all, if you can eat a full roast turkey in seconds, I am very impressed. Bones and all, that is impressive.
Physical powerhouses. This is how they do it.
It's no wonder Axel has that dad bod now.
Right? I mean, and also like the idea of chicken or like a roast meat as healing item is fairly pervasive, even to the point where in Tekken 3, when they had a beat 'em up mode, Tekken Force, the healing item in that was chicken. And I know it was chicken because when you ate it, you'd hear the announcer go, chicken. Like,
amazing.
It's a weirdly all-pervasive thing. And anybody who has made a chicken, a turkey, who has like cooked a whole bird, that is not a little process. So
No.
Like, okay,
No.
drop an apple, cool. You know, I got this apple with me, whatever else. Maybe that's in places. Entire chicken. I have a dream where I want to make Castlevania wall chicken utilizing, well, because there is a method of roasting birds that uses clay. If you use a non-toxic kiln-fired clay, you spice it up, you do everything you need to, you wrap it in the clay, you bake it as if it were a clay pot. And when the clay is ready, break it, you've got a cooked bird. And I think if you set that up so that it can be a brick, you can almost justify having a fully ready chicken in the masonry of Castlevania.
If I was not living in a terrible small apartment, I would totally invite you on Cozywood Kitchenette just to figure that out with me.
Like these are the things. I have so many like Alton Brown, like Charlie Day vision board of just like, all right, we're going to justify this. Why is this okay?
I think like the visuals are really important, but I think some games can't, right? They can't, for whatever reason, give you like really good visuals. And I think there are some games that do textual descriptions really, really well. I think Yakuza is one of them. I started thinking about Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Sharp Effie or whatever. I actually played that somewhat. It was like earlier this year. I think I played that when it came out on the. Was that this year that it came out on the Switch?
Oh my God. I don't
Was it
know.
this year? I don't remember.
This year. Look, the last time you and I hung out in person was only like 8 months ago, and it feels like 10 years ago. So
that was
at
this
this
year.
point,
I think it was this year.
I think it was this year. But so Itsuki will get things out of vending machines, just like vending machine drinks. But he will. I have a screenshot pulled up here. He will give you these beautiful like food critic level descriptions of these things. Like I don't know what item this is from, but the hint of roasted but not quite charred peach is a most succulent surprise indeed. The quintessence of tartdom. What? This is a vending machine drink. It's. But
That's
it's so
funny.
It's so beautiful. Like this writing, like it's clearly someone who like loves thinking about taste and food, and he does this for everything out of the vending machines. I know I can't get through a podcast without at least some point mentioning Golden Sun, and I don't have any like specific examples, but that game has wonderful writing when you examine just random objects and houses. Isaac will give you like a little bit of narration, and there are several places where if you examine ovens or stoves or like pots or whatever, he will describe smelling something just absolutely decadent to him, and it'll vary. Like I don't have a specific example pulled up, but I know that there's some places in like the desert cities or whatever where it's something that's like very culturally specific to that region. It's just this really beautiful smell, and he's very drawn to it. I love that. I love when you can't visually show the thing, you at least give us some like beautiful writing to make our mouths water.
It makes sense. And I also, honestly, I am super here for the quintessence of tartdom. I mean, just in general, like why doesn't somebody describe themselves like that? For one. For second, I have been loving the sort of elevation of mundane food and the like commonality of cuisine. Like you see videos of like you give sommeliers and professional wine tasters $2 chuck, but you tell them it's something else, so you get them to like find all of the fine notes within cheap wine. Or even though something is so basic or so easily grabbed, you know, there are flavor notes in cup noodles, for God's sakes. It's there's distinction in that. And you're right, like those text descriptions, while it's much easier to fit text into your code than new textures, the new images. The pretty pictures are wonderful, as we've been getting on about this. But yeah, you're right. The descriptions can be just as wonderful and allow a greater variety of meals.
I think it's also important, though, that we talk about games that are devoid of food for no reason, because I feel like cooking and food being absent from games makes the world feel incomplete. Like for me, the thing that comes to mind is my favorite franchises of Mass Effect and Dragon Age. There's no food. There's no eating. There's no cooking.
Right. There's no food. Why?
And I've never thought about it. Like you can, as Shepard, you can drink. You can drink till you pass out, but you can't. There's no restaurants. There's no eating, and that's not true. In Mass Effect 2, you have an onboard chef that you can get a recipe for, and you do, and that's it. One quest, and you never eat in that kitchen. You never see him, like he's always standing around. You never see him cooking, even though there's a kitchen on the ship. But that's it. In Dragon Age, I can't think of any instance where there's food. I want
to know what the Elcor eat. I want to know what the Turians eat. I want to know what they all eat.
I want to build relationships over shared meals in the mess. Like all of the conversations you can have, why not have like crew conversations over food? Like
Fire Emblem Three Houses did it.
Yeah.
and then you can learn about all of the different cultures, you know, now that you don't have to be loading in the elevator anymore, being able to discuss things like that. That's absolutely a huge thing. Like that is how you bond with people.
Yeah. It's
BioWare, call us.
Yeah, right. BioWare, get on the phone. We'll make you some meals for those games.
This is the next level. Next level.
Included in the remaster. I didn't realize that until we were talking about it now, because it's one of my favorite games of all time is the Mass Effect trilogy. I just make it one game at this point.
The Mass Effect.
The Mass Effects. And there's no cooking. And it's just so weird to me because it seems like such a glaring omission. And like, especially considering in fantasy games, so like for Dragon Age to not have it when so many other fantasy games, especially of the times that those games are popular in the more modern console generation, it just seems like a thing that you would absolutely have. And it's just very strange to me. And there are tons of other games that don't do it also, but like you'll at least see food or talk about food. Like I can't think of food items in Chrono Trigger, even though I'm sure they're in it. But like you can steal someone's lunch at the Millennial Fair in the beginning of the game. And like there are food moments in that game. And so it just seems weird to me when we don't consider eating or cooking within a game franchise at all. It just seems like such a bizarre thing to leave out completely.
Yeah, I played through Divinity Original Sin 2 late last year and into early this year, and that game has what I think must be a robust cooking system. But a weird thing that game does is we were playing, I think, on story mode, so we were not engaging with everything. But I don't think we were ever prompted to engage with it at all. And we kept like picking up bits of food, and we were like, what do we do with this? We don't understand. But we never needed to. We just sort of ended up throwing them out by the end of it because there was never any prompt to engage with it. There was never any need to. It was never easy or, you know, like shown to us how to do it. And I feel like that was such a missed opportunity in that game because just based on the things that I saw in passing, I feel like there's at least some sort of robustness to that. But it's never brought to the forefront at any point. And so missed out.
Yeah, it's RPGs are definitely the genre to like examine and go, but wait, is there food? Because nowadays with a lot of the robust cooking systems we've been talking about this whole time, they're all open world RPGs on some level. And I mean, by its design and by where we are now, you can put in an entire cooking system and you can choose to engage with it as much or as little as you'd like. But food in Chrono Trigger, in Final Fantasy VI, in those era of games, they only exist as plot triggers. Yeah. You know, giving jerky to the king, if you want to, kind of thing. Dried meat to recruit Gao. It's only there. And fantasy as a genre, like, I definitely remember like it was a Twitter or a Tumblr post or something talking about the way certain fantasy novels are written where they describe the meals for paragraphs and pages. Oh, and someone murdered the king. The next morning for breakfast, they like...
I mean, that's Game of Thrones. That's George R.R. Martin's writing. That's exactly what that is.
It's Lord of the Rings.
Well, okay, he actually describes murdering the king pretty deeply too, but...
Only if they're naked when they do it.
Right.
I mean, Tolkien and like a lot of the Lord of the Rings, like there's all the deep histories. Yes, there's the look at all the languages I can make up. And then there's also look at all the meals that have been made.
Yeah.
And
I mean, but food is also very important to the hobbits in most of those books too. So
it's important to the hobbits. It's important to the culture of each of the different races. It's not just the languages learning about the culture. You learn about what foods they treasure, what they take with them on journeys. And in terms of nowadays, when people talk about world building, food is such a great way to showcase priority, to showcase what is local, what is done, what is made, and where it all divides. And yeah, it's you're leaving lore on the table there. Also, I just want to see more food in games.
Yeah.
I actually started started playing Dungeons and Dragons for like the very first time a little over a year ago. And I tried to make like a character that was because again, for like first time, I tried to make a character that was somewhat close enough to me that I could stretch myself a little bit, but wouldn't have to like, you wouldn't just be like stressed out trying to role play something. And so I made a halfling. Her backstory is that her family owns this inn at like kind of a trading crossroads or whatever. And she grew up in an environment where she was a very much a hostess and a chef. Like she's working in the kitchen, she's helping her family. So she knows how to cook. And I was so upset because at least, I mean, I know people have made like all kinds of, additional things you can add to D&D, but we're just playing like very straightforward vanilla Dungeons and Dragons. And there's not really a path to be a chef in that game. There's not really a lot to do with that. And so there have been so many moments in our campaign where like food or cooking could have been a means to solve a problem or get people to show up or to make something happen. But we just aren't doing, we don't have that built into our campaign in any way. And so we have to like talk around it, or I have to be like, okay, I do this. And he's like, okay, this happened. And it doesn't like, there's not really something already built in there. And that's really, I think I end up having to make her a performer because she tells stories, but it's like a very weirdly, it's very odd. And I know we're all very new to this. I know people who might be listening probably have ways to work around that and could probably just shower me with answers. But yeah, it was just so weird to see that not automatically built into something as like such an institution as Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose that also does get into the notion of subtlety within digital cooking, because it's one thing for like, all right, I bring this many of these ingredients to make the thing. Where do spices come into this? Where does the quality of what you got? Like you kill the fantasy cow, you kill the fantasy bear, and you get its meat. Like, what quality is the meat? What cut of it is it? Like, salt is probably the only spice that comes up. And look, it's important. Salt is extremely important, but come on. Like, herbs, anything, please. And the taste doesn't happen. Like, you hear, oh, this is delicious. But if it's, there's so much variance that can go on in this. And these are the fun subtleties that I suppose this is why cooking is a complex subsystem in open world games that still falls short there, or its own game. Like there's no middle class on this.
This is why I love doing those cookbooks so much, though, because especially the authors that are really, really good at this, several of them have done spice blends at the front of their cookbooks, and they're not things that you find in the game themselves, but they're like spice blends that you would conceivably find in this fantasy world. And then they're used in multiple recipes in the book. And several of my favorite one is from the World of Warcraft cookbook, and it's called Northern Spices. And it's used in a bunch of the recipes from Northrend. So all the wintry stuff. Did I just get the name of that right, or did I just lose my mind? It's
Northrend?
Really early in the morning.
That sounds right.
Northrend is correct.
Okay, I don't know why I thought that was wrong. But yeah, and it's like God, what is in that? But it's like Himalayan pink salt and like cracked pepper, and then I think like something cinnamony, I think, but then also juniper berries, which I have never used in anything in my life. And you crush them up and you make the spice blend, and it is so good, and it tastes like winter. It tastes like pine trees. It's so good, and you can use it like you can season steaks with it. You can put it in soup. There's a chicken soup recipe in that cookbook that I make every year in the winter, and it has that spice blend in it. And I've never tasted tasted chicken soup like that before, but it is so good. And I love that. I love that I have been encouraged to play with spices by these people whose job it is to think about, okay, we don't have any spices in this world, but obviously people would use them. So
Right.
what would that be?
Right.
Yeah, totally.
And what would be the things that, and I like that they go for a more, I guess, northern or, juniper is definitely closer on the Scandinavian side of things. Like the idea of like, what can you get from this region? Because, it's easy for us to go to the store and buy all the spices, all the herbs, but what's local? What can you make with that? And it's always fun to, on an outside of video games idea, the notion of like, when you break it down, a lot of cultures and a lot of different parts of the world have certain universal foods. Like the one that I always go back to is filling in dough.
Yep.
Is it ravioli? Is it a dumpling? Is it an empanada? Is it a pierogi? Like, it's there. And all of those are very different, but structurally are the same.
Yeah.
And so when you are bringing ingredients together and you get the thing, here is your meat-filled dough ball. But how does it taste? But what is it?
What's in it? What is it? Yeah. It's one of those things also, I feel like you never see gradients in games. Like we were talking about how there aren't gradients for describing food, but also even gradients for cooking the food. Like I remember when I played Monster Hunter World for the first time, the different grades of cooking your meat, because you're essentially just cooking meat in that.
Yeah.
But it's like whether you make it rare, medium, well done, like that affects the buff it gives you or how much healing or regen it gives you. And I thought that was really interesting because I'd not encountered a game before where that mattered. And that was really interesting. And it's a difference of seconds because you're cooking it over a magic fire in a video game. So like the meat cooks in seconds. But they like warn you and then there's mechanics tied to it again. Also, that's another game where the food is delicious and I want a kick-ass cat person to make me delicious food.
The first time I saw that cinematic, I
it's so
giggled.
good.
I giggled from sheer just joy.
That's really cool. I didn't know about kind of the grades that like the grades of like cooking meat in that game, because I feel like most games, if they try to do that at all, they do it with like star ratings and it's based on like the quality of ingredients that you use or whether you hit the button at the right time. And I understand why people do that, but if you're someone who's looking for like really good cooking in games, it's just like, okay, but what's the difference between a 5-star and a 3-star? Like not really, there's no like tangible quality attached to that.
It's true. And it gets to and that's the funny thing with like cooking in general and cooking in games. One of the things that I love about cooking and one of the things that got me into it, I, like Matt, am an eternally anxious human being. And it's professionally I'm anxious as soon as I figure out how to make money on it. But the thing is, I get anxious about things I make and things that I create and things that I put out into the world and like what will people think about it. But food, meals, by their nature, are ephemeral, are temporary. You screw up making a burger, you screw up making a thing. That's unfortunate. And maybe you can salvage it, maybe you can't, but you eat it. And usually when I'm learning something or learning a new recipe, if I screw it up, if I can eat it, I will eat it so I know what I did wrong. So that it's a thing you can put out there. And RPGs are a genre where I don't want to drink an elixir. What if I need that later? It's the final
problem.
It's the final battle. What if there's a finaler battle? You're going to hold on to that elixir forever. But if you cook a meal at the start of the game and you hold on to it through hours and hours, it's not going to stay if there's any reality to how this goes. So the fact is, no matter how simple, no matter how ornate, how whatever, you got to eat it. You either got to eat it or get rid of it. And so I was able to get over like anxiety about how a meal was going to turn out because it's one meal. I eat several of these a day. Yeah. So you can move on to the next one. And I've always absolutely loved that. And knowing that you can do grades of cooking in Monster Hunter World, I need to get back into it. I only played it for a little bit and then got overwhelmed by the other systems in the game. I need more games that are like open world where I'm like, I'm just going to level up as a chef. I'm going to make food for people. I need to share this.
My other dream video game that I just desperately want someone to make is like a Stardew Valley kind of thing, like a farm sim, but instead of focusing on the farming elements, it focuses on the cooking elements, and it has like a Cooking Mama-esque level of detail to how you cook. And instead of having a massive farm, you can have like a kitchen garden. You can have like one cow. You can have like a couple chickens that will lay fresh eggs, and then you can buy more things, and everything. The economy is like trading in recipes, and you eventually grow your house into like you have a restaurant attachment. But everything is you learn how to cook the thing, and then it gives you a real life recipe for the food that you just made that you can then translate into real world cooking if you want.
I would love if you could mix something like that with like Moonlighter, the game where you are the innkeeper dungeon delving to get their wares. Like you do go out, maybe you're like you hunt, but you know what you're getting from that animal. So if you're like getting a different kind of meat or different kind of thing there, and then you go back to where your chickens are, you need to have your defenses to protect your animals from what's around. You forage for mushrooms and you pull all of those things together. Yeah, I think this can be a deep and wonderful system that people can go which way they want. I think the market's there.
It's shocking to me that it doesn't exist, to be honest. And there are games that are close, right? Like I know Battle Chef Brigade is like a puzzle game RPG where the puzzle part is making the food, and then you have to do the RPG part to like get the ingredients. But yeah, there are no games like I'd say Stardew Valley is the closest to having a robust system, but it doesn't have a robust cooking system. Like you can do everything, you can get all this stuff, and you can even make things, but there's not really a process to it. I think you're right. I think something where it allows you to do the cooking, but then also do some of the RPG stuff would be really cool. So Mr. Games Industry, because it's a Mr. for sure, because there are problems in the game industry. Call us and we'll make this game for you. I think that what always is endlessly fascinating to me about video games and why there's so much to talk about is when we get into the real world stuff, the stuff we can actually do in physical space and translating it to a video game, the directions it goes and the different styles of doing it, whatever that is always fascinating to me, especially as probably the least experienced chef on this call. Like, seeing even how Ignatz makes just eggs, bacon and eggs, or like a basic breakfast or like a basic soup, like all of those things jump out to me as someone who just might not have thought to put whatever kind of spice on that thing. And I like we always like to talk about on the show how we like to learn from video games and that video games is community and asking questions and growing. And I think cooking is something that is only recently reached the next level and can still grow quite a lot within the games industry. Whereas like a lot of other things like tailoring and like making armor and those kinds of things have gotten more robustness in games. I don't think cooking is quite there yet. And the games industry could do more with that mechanically as well as aesthetically.
I agree.
And it's funny, too, because like tailoring and armor making, those are things that, some people who are very skilled obviously still do today. But those are not, I could not go to my armor making room and make some armor. That is not something that is accessible to me as an average person. Tailoring is, I guess, a little bit closer. Like I have a little sewing kit, I can fix rips and stuff. But again, that's still like not nearly as accessible to me as just going to the kitchen and making some noodles is. That's something that it is a thing that I can connect with like so much more closely than any of the other kinds of like alchemy, magic, crafting things that are in games. And I would love to see more. I would love to see more games embrace that.
Yeah.
More deeply.
It's true. And I do like the educational aspect on it as well, because you get an item in a game, regardless of what the crafting is or whatever else. And immediately if it's a new item, you go, what can I do with this? Right. And that is absolutely a cooking question. You go to the store and you just see something you've never seen before, or like a piece of produce that you've never considered cooking with before, even though you see it all the time. You just go, what can I do with this? And whether you get text descriptions of like, if you broil this, if you bake this, if you simmer, if you whatever, or you just get to try it. Learn a couple of basic, like your conversation wheel of what do I apply to this? And you see what comes of it. not just put it in the pot on the fire, whistle, and you get it. Which, again, still great. And not every game needs a super deep cooking system. I get that. But here we are talking about it, and I'd love to see this exist.
Yeah. My final question for all of us, because I already have an idea in mind, is what is a food item that has stuck with you through gaming? Because I have one already on deck as a food item that I've always wanted to try, that I've always thought about. And it's from a game we've mentioned several times already, which is my favorite game of all time, Chrono Trigger. I want to know what Jurassic pork soup tastes like, because that mini game when you're drinking against Isla, like, it's so, there's just something to it, like, that makes it so visceral because of the way they're lifting this giant bowl and just chugging it. And like, I wish I knew what that tasted like. What would the recipe for Jurassic pork soup be like? What dinosaur would you cook from? Because it's obviously the pork is a meat from one of the dinosaurs. It has to be. Unless, I mean, I guess there are mammals probably around in the Jurassic era as well, but
I would probably put that, honestly, because you get the pun from Jurassic Pork, but I would probably put it at a dark meat bird soup of some kind.
Yeah.
Like you use a large bird. I don't remember what ostrich tastes like. I've had it before. And maybe something like that is probably where my instinct would go.
But that's the food item that I've always wished I could have in real life.
All right.
I think mine would be, and we haven't mentioned this game at all, but my heart goes back to that butterscotch cinnamon pie from Undertale, and I've made a version of that before, but it was deeply simple. It was just like instant butterscotch pudding and then like cinnamon mixed into it into a pudding pie, which is a way to do it. But I really want to think about like a butterscotch cinnamon cream pie, like properly made with like, you know, whipped topping and all the stuff. And that's something that I could make conceivably. Butterscotch is a little hard to do, but it's possible. And I don't know. I think I want to make that sometime and see how it is. But just that feeling of, you know, going into the kitchen and seeing the hot pie cooking on the counter, and then, you know, waking up and finding the slice in your bedroom. And it's just like this very comforting thing. But it's also these two flavors that they don't seem intrinsically opposed to one another, but until Undertale, I had never thought of butterscotch and cinnamon in the same dish. So I love that. And she even asks you, she's like, you know, which one do you like better? But like, if there was one or the other, would you be okay with it?
Yeah, well,
it's great.
And pie as is like one of those aspirational things to bake. Like you can get good with cakes and muffins and brownies and all, but like something about making a pie is an investment and is and like getting to make that. So it says so much about Toriel, of like the amount of love and effort and time that goes into making that pie. Now you got me thinking about it. Damn.
Yeah.
Mine are probably, I do have to give a shout out to Vanillaware Games for how good they make food look always. Like character design, like it's all very beautiful and there's things to say about gender politics and dynamics going on there, but whether Muramasa, Odin's Sphere, a Dragon's Crown, the food looks so good. It's beautiful. But the food items that have stuck with me the longest, for several reasons, I did mention EverQuest earlier. The cooking in that game is very much, do you want to develop carpal tunnel? Play build your trade skills. But in the original version, before expansions, before there were even stat bonuses to the food, I think, there were two that were like, you needed high cooking skill, and there was like compound, like you needed to make things to put it together. The Hallis 10-pound meat pie. Hallis was basically the Northrend area where like the barbarians came from, and it was I think it was lion meat, wolf meat, bear meat, all of the, like you'd have to get all of these from all around the world, cook them up like fennel cream sauce. There were different, I think there was sage spicing and everything. Oh my
God.
And this was a meal.
Stop.
Yeah. And it was a thing that you would eat and you wouldn't be hungry for like 5 or 6 real life hours, which was like days in the game. And the other is the Misty Thicket Picnic. Misty Thicket is where the halflings come from, so naturally they've got a real good food there. And that one, it was, you made a salad from all of the different things that you could pull from the farmland nearby. There was a definite made up, or probably, vegetable called jum-jum. So it'd be like jum-jum, like, and that was and this probably got a real world equivalent if it doesn't actually exist, that was central in some of the salad that you made. It was a spice that went into the drink that you made. You made a chocolate cake, and you would first you make the cake, and then you combine it with a knife, and you get slices. You put a slice into it. You make this. You need to actually make the picnic basket. And it was a full-on just meal of all. And it also was one of those that you weren't hungry for ages. And then when stat boost happened, it was incredible. And it was, again, like the feast in World of Warcraft. You would just put 20 of them in your inventory slot so that whenever you got hungry, you'd eat it and get the stat boost. You wouldn't think about it. But for me, making those and getting strong enough to actually take down the enemy so I could get the ingredients and cook it all and put it together and make those. I want to make a Misty Thicket Picnic, and I want to make a Hallis 10-pound meat pie. I don't know if I need it to be 10 pounds. Maybe it's 10 pounds of meat I don't know.
I mean, I could eat 10 pounds of meat.
I could eat 10 pounds. That's a thing I would share.
Yeah, that's a communal meal.
Communal meal.
That's amazing. I love that. This was amazing, and now I'm hungry, and I'm going to go eat lunch after we're done recording.
Yep.
But before we wrap up, first, Rebekah Valentine, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. This was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please tell the internet where they can find you and your works and your upcoming podcast and all of that stuff. Do your plugs.
You can find me on Twitter at Duck Valentine. You can find my writing about not food, but you can find my business games journalism at gamesindustry.biz. You can find my upcoming podcast. It's the Cozywood Kitchenette. You can find it on Twitter at Cozywood Kitchen. And I gotta say, I prepped to say the date now. We're recording pretty early, but I told myself I'd actually set a dang date. First episode's launching on November 20th. A little later than I wanted, but I gotta make some food and get some audio stuff set up. But it's gonna be every 2 weeks, launching on Fridays, recipe a week, and talk with a nerd who is a different nerd every week who is somehow responsible for the food culture or game world that we're talking about. So yeah.
It's amazing. Awesome. I'm very excited to listen to that. As someone who cannot cook but loves cooking, loves the idea of it, I guess. Cooking in theory. I'm very excited for this podcast.
And it's very down to earth. It's very easy. You don't have to be good at cooking to do this. I'm not good at cooking. I'm going to drop onions. It's going to happen. You're going to hear it.
Excellent.
It's fine. Excellent. Drop them onions. Sorry, I don't know. That just popped into my head. I don't.
That's a T-shirt or a sticker or something. Drop them onions.
Drop them onions.
Dropping onions.
If you are listening to this episode, first of all, thank you for listening. Also, if you have a favorite food item in video games or a favorite cooking mechanic in a game, please share with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter. We're pretty much Fun and Games Pod across the internet. Please give us a like, a subscribe, a rating, a review, all of that nonsense that all content creators need at this point to survive. But thank you for taking the time to listening to us. I also want to thank Certain POV, our podcast network that we're a part of. We're very lucky to be a part of it. There are tons of other great shows to check out on the network. Go to certainpov.com, or you can get a link to our Discord server from that place as well. We have a permanent invite link on there, or just tweet at me or Geoff. We'll share the link there. We're happy to do it. We have an incredible community sharing lots of memes and ridiculousness and some actual conversations of substance as well, which is important. But we have a variety of podcasts, from books to gaming to TV and movies, to comic books, everything you can think of in the nerd sphere and beyond. So definitely come check all of that out.
And if there's anything that we don't cover, haven't covered, that you want to talk about, let us know, because this podcast is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerferders. My name is Case Aiken, and for over 2 years, I've hosted my show, Another Pass, where I sit down with interesting guests to talk about movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Good movies, bad movies, doesn't matter. We find ways that they could have been improved. So if you ever thought that a sequel dropped the ball by forgetting about a plotline, that an epic could have been saved by introducing the director to an editor, or that a comedy didn't work hard enough to have some substance behind the laughs, then check out Another Pass podcast at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.